I'm Joanne Richards, and I am the president of Common Ground for Texans. And we are an organization that tries to seek solutions for some issues of the day and educate our audience about issues that might affect them. And so today we've brought together a panel to talk a little bit about the consequences of the redistricting that just took place in the Texas legislative session. What are the consequences? What happened? What was the process? What are the consequences and what's happening next? The four people who will be talking, and I will then turn this over to Mike Ignatowski, who is our moderator for the day. The four people who are speaking are Katya Ehresman, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name, and she is with Common Cause for Texas, and will hopefully give an overview of what happened, because Common Cause was right into in the thick of it at the time. Gary Bledsoe is the president of NAACP of Texas, and he will be speaking from the lens of the African-American community. Gloria Leal is with LULAC, and she will be speaking from the view of the Hispanic Latino population. And finally, Alice Yee, who will be speaking from the Asian and Pacific Islander lens. I hope that this will help people look at just the process and how different communities look at the process and the outcome from that process. So without further ado, I will turn this over to Mike. And I hope that we will be successful in showing people the different districts that each of the speakers has asked us to show you. It's somewhat of a challenge, but we'll try our best.
Thanks, Joanne. Welcome everyone on what has become, for many people, the start of the holiday week, Thanksgiving week. I know there's a lot of people traveling already. We're recording this for people who can't make it here today live. This is a hot topic on redistricting. Let me give you a little bit of background, then I'll turn it over to the panel members. The US government does a census for the entire country once every 10 years. And after that, various states do redistricting based on the results of that census. Normally, the 2020 census would result in the Texas Legislature redistricting in the 2021 regular session. However, the census results were delayed, so we didn't get around to redistricting until the third special session in the fall here. And we can talk about the implications of that. But there were two important things I just want to point out from the results of the census. One was that the population increase in Texas gives Texas 2 additional seats in the House of Representatives. And the other interesting bit of information is that 95% of the population growth in Texas came from people of color. And we can talk about the impact that had or should have had on the redistricting challenges. Now, as Joanne said, because Common Ground for Texans is a nonpartisan organization, we have asked or given the panel the challenge of trying not to focus too much on the partisan implications of this, how unfair or fair it was to the Democrats, for example, but to talk about the process, the implications of this to people, and what happens going forward with a lot of the lawsuits that have been in place. I tried to create a quick summary of lawsuits that have been filed over redistricting, and I quickly gave up when I realized how many of them were filed. But we can talk about that as we get along into the discussion with the panel. So without further ado, let me turn it over to our first panel member, Katya Ehresman with Common Cause for Texans, to give us kind of an overview of the process and where things stand. Katya.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all so much for having me. I'm with Common Cause Texas. As was mentioned, I'm our statewide organizer. And the process for redistricting, at least on a legislative level, was really inaccessible and obtrusive almost every step of the way for a lot of Texans, especially low-income Texans, Texans of color, young Texans that were maybe tuning into the political process for the first time this year and wanted to see how we can access and achieve equal representation as is promised in the redistricting idea of drawing these new maps and legislative apportionments, and quickly realized in almost every step of the process that it was really hard to access. In about 2019, the redistricting committees of both the House and the Senate on the state legislature side started convening public hearings to kind of gauge what type of communities individuals across Texas wanted there to be included in the maps that are being drawn and then were voted over in 2021. And while this is a legislative requirement, like the need for public input in the maps is set out by a lot of federal statutes that require the process of redistricting to be more open and transparent. Also, increasingly, what we saw was a lot of the public input, especially from activists in communities of color across the state and civil rights experts, not really be taken into account whenever the final maps were voted over a few months ago in the special session, one of the many special sessions that we saw this summer. And so that kind of brings us to the second part of the process of redistricting, in the legislative process, rather, which was the way that the redistricting committees voted over some of these these maps and also solicited public input over the final drafts of maps that we saw. In many instances, individual Texans and groups like many of us represent got less than 36, 72 hours for a hearing being scheduled, when we would have to not only ourselves see the maps, analyze the maps, come up with explanations and analyses of those maps for our members, and then organize them to get down to Austin and testify and write their testimonies over these maps. But also, many of these hearings were happening at the same time concurrently with other attacks on our democratic process, being increases in felony attacks on the electoral process, other redistricting hearings on the House or Senate side. It was a really confusing and obstructive process for many Texans. And what ended up happening was, at most hearings, I think max we saw 50 to 100 people testify about what the map saw, almost all of them being negative about the way that their community was cracked or packed in a specific way. And I know many of the other members will speak specifically to some examples of those districts, but still holistically what we saw was the maps passing out of committees, and the only time amendments were really brought to the floor was by members that were wanting to either not get drawn out of their own specific district, or some members being really strong advocates for our communities and bringing up on the back mic how some of the communities were being drawn out or cracked or packed into certain dilutions of their political power. So I think that I've been talking a lot, so I'll pass it back to you, Mike, but that's kind of an overview of the legislative process that we saw in the state, and also why Common Cause is joining one of the many lawsuits on this set of maps. And this is one of the many lawsuits that we've also filed in the past century. Texas maps have been sued at least over half of the last century because the current power of Texas is not having a great track record of fair and equal maps. So we'll continue to sue and be one of the many lawsuits until we have equal representation in these redistricting maps.
Yeah, thanks. I did have a quick question. You got to use the term cracked and packed. Just for educational purposes, if you could explain that to people here?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for catching that. Sorry, sometimes we fall into the jargon of redistricting. Cracking and packing are two of the kind of terms that I think we use in the legislative world about how communities are either compressed and I guess concentrated in a certain geographic area or based off of racial kind of lines of different community groups. So those would be packing, or cracking, as we kind of see in Congressional District 35, where it's quite literally drawn down the highway of Texas 35 or I-35 and kind of cracked along to dilute different communities, typically on racial polarized and racial partisan lines. So racial or partisan lines. So those are kind of two typical terms that are seen in the ways that the redistricting process becomes a gerrymandering process by diluting political power either on a racial or partisan lens.
Great. I love that cracked and packed term. Next up, we have Gary Bledsoe from the NAACP talking to us from the viewpoint of that organization. Gary, you're up.
And I will try to share my screen, Gary, that shows the districts that you wanted to show.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. Thank you guys so much. We're really honored to be part of this and to be with all of you that, as let me repeat your name, all of us who have common ground. I think our democracy is indeed having some very difficult times now. And so I want to speak from the perspective of what the legislature has done this past session, in particular as it relates to African Americans, but because they're so closely connected, my comments will include also, to some degree, not to get on my good friend Gloria's territory there, but some of the impact on Latinos as they relate to African Americans and to the Asian community as well. As a backdrop, let me mention, I think understanding the statistics in Texas is extremely important when we have a discussion about redistricting. And so much began last time that even though we've historically had discrimination against African Americans and Latinos, even when the Democratic Party was in power, we've seen things escalate as of 2010. And I think that the primary reasons were fears sent around the state in reference to the election of President Barack Obama and the number of Latino immigrants, and that's according to exit surveys. So the most conservative Texans have now got such an alarm that the most conservative of our community now turn out at a rate of 90% per election. So that can really lead to some difficult results. So when the map makers got together this time, there was clear design, obviously, to minimize minority influence. What had occurred is, even though there were really bad maps that were in place that we had fought since the last session and the last time, there were still really bad maps in place. But through growth and changes of that nature, there were gerrymandered maps from 2013. The 2011 maps were invalidated and never implemented, but the 2013 maps were. But as the growth came about in Texas, what you saw is that dominant white districts from the time they were drawn in 2013 many of them became majority minority districts. Some had flipped to majority minority control, and others they were very, very close and strongly competitive districts between white voters and minority voters. So what the legislature did was they strategically looked at the districts where they could have an impact and they could empower white voters. So what they did is they changed the population characteristics in sufficient districts so that they would ensure that that white voters would have the predominant control over the largest numbers of districts in the state. Now, in 2010, African Americans and Latinos were 49.4% of the adult population in the state and 39.3% of the citizen voting age population. When you add the Asian community and you add other minorities, the numbers were exceeded 50, and that has continued to grow to where you have probably about 59% minorities in this state. And so it's really about 60-40 in terms of the actual population that we've seen. So you've seen a big change. But when you look at the districts, what they did was when you look at the state house, they went from having 81 seats that were majority white control to 89 seats, and that's about 60%. And the Senate, there are about 19 seats now that'll be majority white control, right at 60% of the state's population. And when you look at the congressional seats, it's either 24 or 25 out of 38. So again, we're looking at having 60% or greater control over the seats for really 40% of the population is what has occurred. And what I wanted to do was to show you how you can do some really irregular things in order to make sure that you continue to have white control. If we look at the map that should be on the screen there from Plan 2316, I want to highlight in the screen towards the middle, the top middle, you see House Districts 54 and 55. And what occurred there is they split Killeen in order to make sure that you could continue to have two white controlled districts. The Legislative Bloc Caucus, the NAACP, many other groups tendered districts that would have presented a new minority opportunity district with District 54. And you see how strange this looks, in that you have one district with a circle around another district, and that is so highly irregular to see something like that. But it looks like a donut, and I would call that the donut-shaped district. And so they created this donut in order to prevent African Americans and others from being able to achieve another seat. And so that's one of the districts we'll be suing under. Now, I want to mention too, as we go through what we're looking at, what the legislature did in reference to the maps. There were a number of new districts, particularly for Latino Americans, but a number for African Americans, and some for African Americans, Asian Americans, and Latino Americans combined, that could have been created that were not created by the legislature. And what the legislature is doing is they're betting that the United States Supreme Court will not hold as what at least two circuits have held in the past, and that is that you can combine minority groups together to form a group for purposes of requiring that a district be created under the Voting Rights Act if certain criteria are met. We believe you can put Black, brown, and Asian voters together in communities where they live together and have common interests and they vote together. We think you can put those together and require the creation of new districts. The legislature has conveniently decided that that doesn't apply in Texas, and they're betting that the United States Supreme Court or the courts in Texas with so many new conservative judges will not ultimately rule on that in our favor. So there are many districts that could have been created under all of three maps that would have been majority, minority, state house, state senate, and United States congressional maps that could have been created, but they were not created. And so that's going to be one of the big issues and discussions going forward. We looked at Collin County, Brazoria County, Lubbock County, Midland County, some interesting areas where we see new districts that might have been created, in particular, as we said earlier, Bell County. And because of population issues, there were Latino districts that were lost, and the legislature sought not to replace them. And so there are other areas in the state where they could have replaced them, but they chose not to. So that's yet another issue. Now, one of the ploys that they take is if it's a crossover district, which is black, brown, and white, and possibly Asian, being in coalition with each other, where white voters are essential to the winning coalition. They're taking the position that they don't have to maintain those districts. So they got rid of, for example, HD 65 up in Denton County, and that's the scenario that they use to get rid of it. Senate District 10 up in Dallas, the same thing they did when Wendy Davis held the position back in 2010. So they're doing that with those districts. Also, I think that what's important to, and I know I've got limited time, so let me just move to one more point that I want to make. A new Latino seat should have been created in Bexar County. I mean, in Harris County, and Senate and Congressional District 37 is now a new white majority controlled district that should have been and easily could have been created into either a Latino district or a Latino Asian opportunity combined district or what have you. So we think the legislature really missed it when they failed to create that with Congressional District 37 in the new map. But if you look, for example, at the congressional map, the racial gerrymander in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, you'll see is kind of interesting. And what they do in Dallas is they go and they take parts of Dallas and then they join it with other areas, so that you go out of the county, and so voters out of the county can dominate the voters within the county, so that you limit the impact of minority voters. And they do that with Dallas and Tarrant County, so that metroplex gerrymander is really pretty egregious in terms of how it's occurred, and they've used that to minimize. There should be the Congressional District 32 there. The Tarrant County, let's see here, 33. I mean, I said 32. I mean 33. That district should be moved back to Tarrant County. Could be made into a true African American district, and a new Latino congressional district could easily be created. And the legislature could have done that, but they've continued to do this, where you see this district moving all the way from Tarrant into Dallas counties, and that didn't have to happen that way. But you also see in the map, in terms of look at how Congressional District 6 snakes up in the counties, and you see how strange that is with Congressional District 6. But that's meant to limit the impact of voters in Tarrant and Dallas counties. And you see so you see the same thing that's occurring with the districts up in the Metroplex, to where you can see they snake in and out, and you join them with 5 and other districts to go out of the county and limit the minority voting strength in those areas. So those are many things that they've done to limit African American and Latino voter potential. So we've sued, and we've sued based on all 3 maps because we think there's illegal vote dilution and all 3 maps in terms of what they've done to the integrity of communities and their voting strength. And also we've sued saying they should have created new districts, that they should have created new opportunity districts at every level. For example, we think that they diminished the voting strength of the Whitmire seat in Harris County, and that already was, in our opinion, a minority opportunity district, and that they diminished that, but it could have even been made stronger. And so that's one of the other areas we'll be looking at and suing about. So thank you very much. Look forward to discussing the matter later with other panelists, and appreciate the opportunity to appear today.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. We'll probably come back to the question about the lawsuits later, what the Voting Rights Acts require, what the Supreme Court said is okay, and what it said is not okay. And we'll see how that plays into all of this. Next up on our panel is Gloria Leal from LULAC. Gloria, let me turn it over to you.
Yes, my name is Gloria Leal. I'm an attorney and consultant in Austin, Texas. I'm also state LULAC redistricting chair. And for your information, LULAC is the state's oldest Hispanic civil rights organization. We have, state and national organization levels, and we are happy to participate in this panel. So my comments are going to be a little bit at the state level, but I completely adopt my colleague Gary Bledsoe, who I've known since law school or for a long time, and in our issues with redistricting civil rights matters. So we're going to talk about the litigation, but the basis of the lawsuit, which is LULAC versus Abbott, is based on 2 issues. And they apply to the 4 maps, which is for U.S. Congress, Texas Senate, Texas House of Representatives, and State Board of Education. Based on the state demographers report, which stated that 95% of the population growth in Texas was attributed to minority growth, particularly Hispanics, we believe, or LULAC has taken the position that Hispanics should have been entitled to, at the least, new opportunity Hispanic seats, majority seats for all the 4 maps, in U.S. Congress, Texas Senate, more opportunity districts at the state level, and for the State Board of Education. And second basis of the lawsuit is that the maps, all 4 maps, effectively dilute or eliminate Hispanic opportunity districts to vote for candidates of choice. Without being partisan, the fact of the matter is that Hispanics tend to vote Democrat. So when you redistrict a district or gerrymander a district to add more non-white or non-minority votes, it's impacting minority impact because Hispanics tend to vote as a group Democrat. So I agree. One of our basic positions, number 1 positions, is that there should have been a new Latino seat created at the congressional level in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. 95% of that growth that is attributed to the Hispanic population a lot of that growth is based on the movement to Dallas, or the growth in Dallas, Fort Worth area of the Hispanic population. Notwithstanding that fact, there are no Hispanic congressmen or Congress representatives from Dallas, Fort Worth that are Hispanic. Not a single one. Not a single one. And a new congressional seat could have been created in that area without affecting the current districts if the legislature had chosen to do that. We do not have a single Hispanic member that is Hispanic from the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And in Harris County, as Gary Bledsoe, my colleague, pointed out, there could have been a new Senate seat created, a new congressional seat created in Harris County, and a new Senate seat created in Harris County, but that was not done. At the state representative level, I'm not even going to talk about the ridiculous gerrymandering that happened to get some seats, gerrymandering to have more of a more partisan impact on behalf of the Republican Party. And I know this is not a partisan discussion, but it is what it is. And what has happened? What has happened? In South Texas, for example, State Representative Rian Guillen, because of the voting of the last election, which had some of his, I think that's, I don't know if that's 31 or not, Rio Grande City, resulted in some counties voting Republican. It doesn't mean that that trend will continue, but it has given pause to that community. And now we have a state representative from Starr County, whose base is Rio Grande City, which has been a traditional seat, deciding that he will be running as a Republican because I believe that he thinks that he can win in that district. However, he does have two Hispanic Republican members of the Republican Party that are not claiming that Representative Guillen as a Johnny come lately to that party. And in San Antonio, and Gary, you know this, we now have a new state rep, I believe, Lujan, in Bexar County of all places, that have elected a new state representative who's a Republican. So I asked to show the maps for the congressional districts in South Texas to show that, and I don't think that they're shown. Okay, so there is now the perception, I say because of the perception, not based on reality yet, but given the demographics and the trends of the last election, that these 28, 15, 34 are now considered fajita districts that were extended by the redistricting map to go north to encompass more rural areas to make these three districts more biased towards a rural non-minority impact district. And what does that mean without being partisan? They redrew the districts to encompass more rural Republican votes to possibly take advantage of the perceived growth in South Texas of Republican influence, which is a reality. It is. The ideology, and I'm from South Texas, Rio Grande Valley, for South Texans, it's not the same that should be preached, because in South Texas, some of the values, or some of, not the values, yeah, some of the values, okay, and some of the interests are not the same as urban Hispanics. I don't think they will win those seats, but they could, again, without being partisan. And in terms of Congressional District 33, which is current Congressman Mark Vesey's seat, and he is an able congressman. The fact of the matter, the demographics were predicting that this was going to be an Hispanic majority seat, and now that the district has been gerrymandered to exclude minority seats, Hispanic seats to one level, and it took away some of the African American seats. It's now able Republican bent seat. And so that eliminated an opportunity for a minority, either African American or minority or Hispanic seat to win. But our position at the LULAC level, if we want to increase, we believe that based on the population trends, Hispanics were entitled to a new congressional seat in Dallas-Fort Worth that did not affect the existing seats and the existing representation, a new congressional seat in Harris County, and new state representative seats in Harris County, as Gary Bledsoe said, that would increase Hispanic and African American representation in the Fort Bend County. Absolutely. The statistics are the Asian community is rising, and they could have obtained a congressional seat or other representation at the local level. That concludes my presentation at this level. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks, Gloria. We'll come back to questions later.
Okay.
So you were the third panelist in a row, I believe, to say your organization is involved in suing Texas government or redistricting. We'll come back to that again.
Okay, thank you.
Alice Yee is up next. I understand she's from the League of Women Voters, who's also suing Texas, but she's not going to be speaking on their behalf. She's going to be talking on behalf of the Asian Pacific Islander American Public Affairs Group. So Alice, you're up.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation to be on this panel. I have several hats, and on behalf of APAPA, we initial is APAPA, Asian Pacific Islander American Public Affairs Association. This is a grassroots, community-based, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, and we always focus on increase the ANPI civic participation through the voter education, voter registration, and voter turnout. At the same time, I'm also a founder and a chair for the Austin Asian Community Civic Coalition. I have to mention this coalition because we worked on census as our Central Texas AAPI census count. And because we involved the census count, and at the same time this year, we involved with our redistricting. So we formed the AAPI Redistricting Coalition, and our team, actually the team leaders, the Ashley Chen, and she couldn't make it today. That's what I'm speaking, not professional. And we had over 100 people to testified in both House and the Senate. And I even have my 92-year-old father testified. And so this is the opportunity we testify and we speak out, but the reality is we still be cracked. And the people of color, like beginning, we all know 95% of Texas population growth is the people of color. And on 2020 census shows there are nearly 2 million AAPIs in Texas now call home, Texas home, and which makes our growth from last 10 years was 66.5%. So right now we have a 5% electoral, and this is not just the swing votes. That 5% in Texas voting is the vote over the victory votes. But if we all can combine our votes in somehow in the same county or same district, we can choosing our own representative, but not as our district. And I just had this House representative map. I want to talk and concentrate on the local, so our audience easy to understand our local situation. Look at I also need to give some data to all this district. For District 47, the Asian population growth was 99.8%. 48 has Asian population growth of 42%. 49 has 53%. 50 has 74%. 51 has 96%. Look all this growth, but look at the corner of the 47, 48, 49, 50, and 136. All this corner is concentrated our API community, but we've been cracked by 5 different representatives. I'm not complaining all representatives, they're great. But in somehow, if our population in combined in either one on 47 or in 48, we can have a lot of voice. And this is the sad fact. And we all separated by this 5 different representatives. And sometimes it is hard for the people in a Standard Ranch area, which when they need help, for example, this last February, when they out of power, when they need food, they need a drink, and they don't know which part they're going to call, this 47 or 136 or John Busey or is a good one, or even Israel back then, and Israel has a little more on Green Hill area. So this is really not on our side. And people of power is really just thinking about how to control their power, control their interest. Our people of interest in our AAPI community is really divided and diluted, and it's not. And there's another map I want to talk about is the Congressional Map. The Congressional Map, I'm so glad our Congressional district had our own congressional seats, 37. It's a newly created 37 district, which is our long-time Congressman Doggett is running on this 37. And look at this 37. There's this green area at the Lake Travis area should be a 37. And also look at the Congressional District 10 cracked on Northwest area all the way crossed out. And this is cracked our interest too. Our people of color and our Asian community interesting is in either Northwest, which is above this 37 on the border of 37 and 10. A lot of our community was represented by 10, which this representative is not representing our value, it's not representing our voice. So our community is really frustrated why they have to be in this district. Really, they could be in 37 or even 17, but they really hate to still be connected in the District 10. But in somehow, you all understand that 35 back then was Congressman Doggett's district, was all stretched to the to along I-35. Congressman Doggett always joking, and he's 35, represents 35. He's along I-35. He's really represent I-35 also, all the way to the San Antonio area. This is a perfect gerrymandering sample, and I'm glad that he's running 37, so he gave 35 out to maybe we can have our Latino representative in this 35, which stretched from San Antonio to Austin area. And with all this people of color, if we have 40%, over 40% in local Latino population, over 15% Black African American population, and another 10% of Asian American, we really are the winning majority, but we all separate in somehow, and so we never can have our interest in our vote really doesn't matter to me and to our community. And we have a representative in, it's called Asian American Legal Defense Education Foundation. It's a New York-based national organization. They are our legal representative in this lawsuit. My organization, our organization, APAPA, is currently not in the lawsuit, which means in Austin area. But our partner, OCA Great Houston, is in the lawsuit. Our ADF is representing us. I'm going to just read some of the statement from ADF attorney, which represent our Asian American. This is the statement they put out at the same day when the lawsuit filed. This is from Jerry Vadmala, director of democracy program with ADF. He said, Asian American and Pacific Islanders are the fastest growing racial group in America, and especially in Texas. Together with their Black and Latino neighbors, AAPI have already demonstrated that they vote together. It is clear that those new legislative district lines were drawn to intentionally divide those rapidly growing AAPI community and preventing them and other communities of color from electing candidates of their choice. So this is the truth. This is the statements representing our community, representing this lawsuit. And we just hope in somehow or more of population or our ordinary citizens to aware what happening to this state, what happening to the map, the gerrymandering map. So I hope next time around we have more people to volunteer to speak out, speak aloud, and we have to join force together. Together we can speak louder. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. That was good.
Mike, before we leave the map, one of the things I'd like to show folks is that District 10, which is Michael McCall's district, is shaped rather strangely. And one of the reasons is because his house is here and he wants to represent his district. So that's one of the reasons why you see this really odd shape. I thought I might point that out.
Yeah.
I used to be in this district. I am now in this district. There it is.
Okay.
So
Gloria,
can I
any
make
comment?
a comment?
Sure.
Miss Yee, I really appreciate your comments. I'm in Austin, Texas, and I'm with LULAC, but I wanted to state that LULAC has not focused on the Travis County area in terms of redistricting. For the reason is that for the first time, Travis County has the congressional seat wholly encompassed in Travis County in the Austin area. So Lloyd Doggett, Congressman Lloyd Doggett has decided to, instead of running in his old district of 35, going to 37. So 35 now is a Hispanic opportunity seat.
Yes.
But the reason it is configured all the way to Bexar County, and I know this, is that there was a interest from Bexar County state rep that was interested in running for that seat. And that person is no longer running. I'm not, and he requested that he being included in the redrawing of Congressional District 35. He has now indicated that he's not interested or he's not running for that seat. I'm just saying that sometimes input does make a difference in the redrawing of districts, but that individual from Bexar County is no longer interested in running for that seat. There may be a Bexar County representative, but the majority, if you can see from the map, the majority of the district is now centered in southeast Travis County, Hays County, and a little bit down here between Comel and Guadalupe. But, you know, Bexar County, because of the population, could still make an impact on the district. But I'm just saying that there was a reason that it was drawn that way without me stating who requested it, okay? But I really do appreciate your comments. And I just want you to know.
I'll let you know.
We're
35.
very happy Hispanics that we finally have an opportunity to elect
We have
an
two.
Hispanic to that district,
Yes.
although we always had it.
We, I'm so glad to tell you, 35. We have two candidates I know. They both my friend. They're running for I-35. One is city council members Greg Azar, and one is the state rep Ed Rodriguez. They both Latina, and they both representing this district. And this district, 55% people of color in this district.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
if we can get a majority people voting for them, that's their district. And
Well, I'm just saying it's an open seat and anyone can run and everyone is running that can because there's no incumbent.
Yes.
So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So I want to give our panel members a chance to comment on what happens next, and then we'll open up for any questions from the audience. So a little bit of background. The Supreme Court recently has said that it's not the job of the courts to address gerrymandering that gives one party an advantage over the other. The courts will not resolve that issue. However, the Voting Rights Act still says you cannot gerrymander to give one race an advantage or disadvantage over another. And the Supreme Court still affirms that that is a valid concern. So that determines how you direct some of the lawsuits. I suspect the lawsuits will go on for a while. I invite any panel members to make a guess at how many years they will take. But we also have in December a requirement that the people register for the primaries for the upcoming 2022 elections. So how does that get impacted when the new redistricting is not yet resolved in the courts? So I'll open up to any panel members who want to take any of that on.
I'm just going to address one point, and then I would appreciate if Gary would address the gerrymandering and the legality of it or not. The LULAC versus Abbott lawsuit requests an injunction to prevent the results of the redistricting maps going into effect. And because the litigation process takes so long that the results of the April 22nd elections, which are going to be based on the new maps, not be certified. And in addition, to have specific districts that are in contravention of the Voter Rights Act and the US Constitution be redrawn in a way that will not dilute or impact the voting rights potential of our population to elect candidates of their choice. With that said, the elections will go forward on April 22nd. The candidates are filing. They will be sworn in. They will be in office, and it'll be what it'll be. So, Gary, you can talk about the redistricting, the implications of the lawsuit that said the litigation that said gerrymandering is legal provided that it doesn't violate voters in certain respects. Thank you.
Gary.
Gloria, you're 100% correct on those items. Let me mention in reference to the concerns that I have. The big case in my mind is kind of the Common Cause versus RUCO case that went up to the Supreme Court that involved an extreme gerrymander in North Carolina, and they also had the Wisconsin case that went up, and both of those involved situations where voters were about equally divided between Democrats and Republicans, but the maps were just so one-sided. Like I think in North Carolina, they had 13 congressional seats, and the map would have given 10 seats to one party, even though the vote was about 50-50. So you can see what you can do with an extreme gerrymander like that. Last time in Texas, the legislature in the state took the position that, yes, we discriminated against Black people and brown people and Asian people. We did that, but we did it because they vote. Well, they didn't acknowledge that about Asian population at that time, but they did acknowledge they discriminated against Blacks and browns, and said we did it not because they were Black or brown, though. We did it because they vote Democratic. And so they weren't able to prevail on that when we went to the 3-judge panel up in DC under Section 5 when it was still viable. We won a decision on that basis that ultimately was overturned by Shelby County just because they were deciding that Section 4's formula was no longer valid, so you couldn't enforce Section 5, but it was never reversed on the merits. And so there's a written opinion by 3 judges up in DC that makes it very clear that there were various reasons, such as meeting a certain test on intentional discrimination called Arlington Heights, why they decided in that case that they couldn't prevail with that argument. And so that's the issue now. The state says, yes, we definitely discriminated against them. We marginalized them, limited them, but we did it because they vote for the other party. So if you allow them to get away with that, that basically takes away the teeth from the Voting Rights Act, because it then gives them a legal reason to do what the Voting Rights Act says that you cannot do. And so that's the big concern, the issue that we have, and why we need to come together. Let me, the argument I made in the redistricting trial last time, let me give you an example of what I did, and I think this makes it very clear. I went out and bought a bunch of bananas and took them to court with me. And so I had a brown bag with bananas, but I took the bananas out and walked up to the podium, and the judges were wondering what I was doing. So I took the bananas and I said, now, Your Honor, judges, Congress has just passed a law saying that you cannot damage bananas. These bananas are protected. And I want to protect these bananas, so I'm going to put them in this brown bag. What I'm saying, but the state over here, they look at me, put the bananas in the brown bag, and they come over and say, we don't like brown bags. And they see me put the bananas in the brown bag, they just start punching and punching and punching the brown bag, knowing they're destroying the bananas that are inside. And boom, you destroy the bananas that are inside. They defied the intent of Congress, but they said they did it because they didn't like brown bags, even though they knew they were destroying the bananas. And see, that's basically what we're looking at here, right? We're looking at a situation where they're just trying to get a legal way to get around the Voting Rights Act. I think it's absurd, but it's really dangerous because they may get away with it. What the Supreme Court said and the RUCO and other cases that now has empowered them this time is that we don't think we can come up with a measure. We don't think we can come up with a formula. In fact, I think that some of the judges even kind of laughed at the formulas that were being put forth by Wisconsin, which seemed to me to make good sense. But they're hiding behind the idea that you can't come up with a formula. And when the Supreme Court now is much more conservative, after we won a case in front of a majority Republican panel and get that reversed in 2018, now it's a much more conservative panel. And so I think they feel the likelihood that this partisan gerrymander idea will be the way for them to just get rid of the Voting Rights Act without having to invalidate it, because there'll be a hole big enough to drive a Mack truck through if they don't allow racial gerrymanders to be litigated, because that'll just give a rubber stamp to let's do what we want. And you have to wonder, you look at what just happened in Galveston County, getting rid of the African American county commissioner seat, or you look at what happened in Baytown as soon as the Section 4 was eliminated. They tried to get rid of the Latino seat there. And so, different things that they're doing in different communities that will now be happening more and more if that's the case. So we have to hope that what we did last time and using Arlington Heights and other factors, that the courts still have enough integrity to look beyond party and to make a judgment that there's a reason why we have the Voting Rights Act, that we want the different groups within this country to be participating and sharing in government and having open discussions and being part of what's happening, and not locking people out and just telling certain groups, this is what we're going to do and this is how it's going to impact you. I don't think that's the way to run a society.
Keep in mind also that during the layout of the congressional bill and the Senate bill by Senator Joan Hoffman, who was a sponsor of the bills in the Senate, she proclaimed that the districts were race neutral, and that she did not take into account the demographics of the area or the residence of any particular member in drawing the congressional maps or the state Senate maps. With that said, she also acknowledged that the congressional map was based primarily on information drawn from congressional members and a Republican consultant, and that she did not consult with any minority member of either Congress or the Senate or any group, including the LULAC or NAACP or MALDEF, in drawing the groups, so the maps. So I say that because even though they state that, and gerrymandering and partisan politics did not go into account in the drawing of the map, she did state this and repeatedly said they were race neutral. And for example, the first map that was drawn for the congressional redistricting paired to long-term incumbents, African-American members in the Harris County area together, and said that they were race neutral, that she was unaware of the residency of the members, but it turns out that she had requested that every congressperson submit their address. And clearly, this oversight was corrected, which would have been a principal violation of the Voter Rights Act comparing to African Americans in the Harris County area. So they clearly were aware of the fact that whatever they did was going to go to litigation, and they did what they could to mitigate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to give our other two panel members, Katya and Alice, a chance to talk about any comments they had about where we go in the future and what happens next.
Yeah, I can jump in really quick and say that I think a lot of the comments have been made by the other two panelists about some of the holes that previous litigation has created in the fight for redistricting, especially in the courts. I represent in Common Cause Texas, and we're in one of the more recent litigation and lawsuits filed with Fair Maps Coalition and a number of other nonpartisan nonprofits across Texas. One thing that we also hope to see is also federal action by the U.S. Congress to create some other safeguards in the Voting Rights Act that were gutted by both Rucho v. Common Cause in 2019, which was the Supreme Court decision that held federal courts being powerless to adjudicate partisan gerrymandering disputes. And Mr. Bledsoe went into a lot more detail than I will about that lawsuit, but also with Shelby County. And so one thing that we also hope to see is federal action on the Freedom to Vote Act in coming weeks, especially before the end of the year, to supply federal courts with that standard that was missing in Rucho to prohibit states from implementing maps and redistricting plans that intentionally or effectively favor specific parties or dilute along racially polarized lines. And so to answer the specific question that you asked earlier, it is hard for us to implement this or any federal statute that would change the effects of these maps before the primary. Most likely, the timeline had already been pushed back so long because of the delay in getting census results because of the pandemic and a number of the kind of data-based or tech-based delays that was caused. But we do hope that the litigation takes years every time since the Voting Rights Act in 1965 that Texas has been sued. It has been in lawsuits and legal battles for years over their redistricting plans. And so while this might not affect the upcoming elections in the upcoming months or even this year, hopefully if the U.S. Congress acts now and actually allows for some of the holes in federal standards that have been gutted in previous Supreme Court decisions to redevelop our Voting Rights Act in pro-democracy standards, then hopefully maybe in other elections in the next decade, we can see a more equitable distribution of power in our redistricting plans. So maybe not the most optimistic answer, but that is another step that Common Cause is looking for, especially as we watch our own litigation that we're a member of and the federal Congress and its ability to act before the year's end.
Great, thanks. I'll give Alice a chance if she has anything she wants to say, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience.
I don't have anything except I already said everything already. And the only one thing I said, we worry about our primary will be pushed back because of the lawsuit too. So primary was said about March, and who knows what is going on. This is affect a lot of candidates. And to solve the problem, really, every election
that primaries are not going to be pushed back.
Oh, good. That's good.
They will not.
They were not.
I don't foresee that at all.
Okay, that's good.
Gary, are you on the phone? I don't think they're going to push back. That's the whole issue, is that when the litigation finally gets to where it's at, the issue is whether to certify the candidates that have been elected. And I'm not aware, Gary, please tell me if any candidates that ran in the new districts have ever not been allowed to serve. And I'm not aware of that, but they're not going to be pushed back. Gary, can you address that issue?
There's no, Gloria, you're right. They're not going to be pushed back.
They're not
They
gonna
would
be
have
pushed
done
back.
it.
So don't worry
Here.
about that. Get your people out, vote for your candidates.
Yeah, the
All right.
filing deadline has already started. Now, there
Yes.
have been times when they have invalidated primaries and made them redo primaries in states. Now, that's more likely, and that I don't think it's going to happen either. But that's more likely than stopping it. I think you can put your money on the fact that there will be primaries in March.
Yes. Sorry to interrupt you, Ms. Yee.
That's okay. There's another comments I want to make, just like a Common Ground of Texas and Legal Woman Voter and a Woman for Good Government, all those organizations to get people out to vote. That's the short term. I feel like that's more dependable. It's in our hands. We get more people to vote. We get more candidates to those some of the district, you never know. We're going to change state house and we might change the gerrymandering for next 10 years. So this is a long shot, but every election matters to follow all this organization doing great work and bring more new people to the voting booths and get more people registered. This is our ultimate goal to how to say that, to get everybody's voice to be heard. Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks. We all completely agree. Any comments, questions from the audience? You can either virtually raise your hand, the hand raise symbol, or physically raise it on the window. Joanne, do you want to go?
Yeah, so I've been following lately this conversations about independent redistricting commissions. And although I know that the group in Texas has been pushing for that, it has not been smooth sailing over this past redistricting issues because they've been challenged by congressmen within their districts. So I wonder if anybody could address some of the difficulties that the independent redistricting commissions around the country are having as a result of drawing maps in their districts. In other words, is it the panacea that we all think it will be?
I guess I'll take the first crack at that. I'm not one of those who is completely embraced the idea behind the commissions because it's really the details that matter in many ways. That who appoints people to the commission, what authority do they have, who sets up the particulars of the guidelines that they must adhere to. And I don't know that the results in California and other places have been what they need to be. And it seems as though people on one political side are doing commissions and people on the other side are making sure they don't do commissions. So you have one side that's trying to play with a certain set of rules and another side playing under the rules we've been talking about, like in RUCO versus Common Cause, right? And so I think unless you do it nationally, it shouldn't be done because you end up hampering some groups or some states. But it's really in the details: who serves, who's on there, and because, for example, minorities vote Democratic, but the Democratic Party is not always with the minority community. It's like when we fought the Democratic Party over Congressional District 9 to get Congressman Green's district created. You don't always on the same side as the party, and so I want to make sure that the African American community has an independent voice that's on there, and I think Gloria would say the same thing about the Latino community. And I think that we want the communities to have their independent voices, and if you have Democrats appointed or whatever, same thing as with judicial appointments, right? It doesn't matter whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, you're going to get white shoe law firm type folks if you go to an appointment. But if you want people who are really connected with the people, who go to the events that we do, who share and bleed and care for people the same way that we do, you can't go to an appointed system. Those people are not going to be appointed by a Democratic governor or a Republican governor. So we have to look at the details. So that's why I don't see it as a panacea.
Great, thanks. Anyone else? Gloria.
I don't think the issue has legs, as Gary Bledsoe say, as we say in the legislature, it doesn't have legs because it depends who the political powers in place and who the appointees to the commission are. And it's like goes to the issue of appointment of whether judges should be appointed or elected at a certain level. Well, it sounds really good. We should have meritorious appointments. However, who's doing the appointees? Who's doing the appointments? And based on what credentials? And if you have that kind of system, for example, we wouldn't probably have the number of minority women, African Americans elected in Houston, Harris County, or in San Antonio, or Austin, if it was on a merit basis, because they would never say that we have enough credentials as white males, frankly. So even though it sounds really, really good, theoretically, at this point in time, we could not support that concept unless we have some specific authority into who gets appointed on the commission that's making the selection. So I completely agree with my colleague Gary Bledsoe. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Joanne, do you have another comment?
Yes and no. I don't want to distract folks from the conversation, but Gary and I have talked about judicial selection for quite some time, right? And I guess one of the only comment that I would make would be at the appeals court level and at the Supreme Court level in Texas, we really don't elect our judges at that level because they typically leave their seat before their term is over so that the governor then appoints, and then they get reelected based on the appointment from the governor. So I would agree with, and Gary and I have both talked about this over and over again, that at the lower level of district court and below, I would agree. At a higher level, I don't. But that has nothing to do with redistricting, which is what we're really talking about.
No, but ma'am,
it
it
might have
does
something
have
to do with
everything
it
to do
because we
with
don't have an avenue.
redistricting. Because the fact of the matter is, who's ever making the appointments is whoever's head of the party.
Well, yeah, but that's what happens now.
I completely agree with you.
It happens now anyway. So
Yes.
Gary, you were going to say something though.
Sorry.
No, I would say well, one of the things we want to look at is litigation in the state courts, because let's say, for example, things do change in Texas. With the growth changes and all that,
Okay.
there is every reason to believe that, and this is from my expert, not for me, but somebody who's really looked at the numbers. By 2024, unless this new election bill is going to keep so many folks out of the voting booth, there may be a real change in Texas, not 2022, but 2024. So you might all of a sudden see voices at the Supreme Court of Texas or the Court of Appeals that might be more reflective of people and might be more fair. We don't want somebody that's going to lay down and just do what we ask. We want to really have a system and a constitution and statutes, but we want someone that'll look at it fairly, right? And try to look at all the interests and make decisions based upon the facts and the law, and not based upon who's on which side, which is what happens now. So I would say that in reference to what we're talking about, that would give us another avenue. Those states that have constitutions, we have a constitution that's okay. We could litigate under our constitution. We just don't have judges at the highest level that are going to be willing to enforce it, right? But I think that would be good. So I want to say that's the only counter that I would say about that issue.
I want to make sure anyone else in the audience who has a question has a chance here. Raise your hand or just speak up or put something in chat. In the meantime, I had one final question. And this is the issue some people have raised, that the Texas Constitution says redistricting will happen in the regular session after the results have been released. And I believe some of the lawsuits are claiming that redistricting in a special session is not allowed. Anyone want to comment on that situation?
Marty Galando has a suit where he represents, I think, Senator Gutierrez and Senator Eckhart, and I think it's a good and viable theory that they have. I don't think it's going to be a winning theory. I think they're going to come down the same way the Supreme Court did in the Pennsylvania case and what was allowed in the Texas case. I think they'll probably come out saying that you're required to do it the first regular session, which would be 2023, but not that you're prohibited from doing it the other times. I mean, obviously it'd be good if they win, but I think if they had a likelihood of winning, they would have gotten injunctive relief already, but they didn't get injunctive relief and the election's already started. So I think we can say that the judge didn't have any stomach for that one, probably thinking they would get reversed. So the judge just didn't act on it. So I think that request is kind of moot, I guess, at this point. Almost.
I think it's moot. I agree with Gary. However, the court hasn't ruled, but I completely agree with Gary that they will probably, again, they haven't ruled, talk about the pandemic and all the reasons why they could not have acted during a regular session or the two special sessions because there was not a quorum. So the last opportunity was the third session where they had a quorum. Thank you.
If there's no other questions from the audience, I'll give an opportunity for any panel members who want to make a final comment here to do so, and then we'll wrap this up.
Thank you all for including LULAC.
You're very welcome.
For inviting me to join.
You're
Thank you.
very welcome.
Thank you. Enjoyed being with such a great panel of human beings and advocates.
It's
Same
a
here.
great
Thank
panel.
you for the invite.
Yeah, you're very
Happy
welcome.
Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving.
So
Yes.
this is
Heavy on the turkey, everyone, light on the dressing. Right.
yeah, right. This is our last meeting for 2021. We take December off and have our board retreat to see what's going to happen in 2022. But I really do thank you all very much for spending the afternoon with us today. And we will head off to have turkey in Hawaii tomorrow.
Don't rub that in. Do not rub that in. Do not. No, you said
Thank you.
What? Thank you very much. Good night.
It leaves us with that comment. Now that's just
Yeah,
not-
right.
Oh my
right.
God,
What do you want
Right,
from?
that's
Right,
not-
we want son from Hawaii. But our son and his family live there.
That's not right. That is not right.
No, not right. Bye. Good night.
Enjoy.
Thank you very much,
Bye.
and thanks, Mike.
Sure.
Bye bye.